Welcome back to the Deep Dive, where we take your stack of sources and turn them into essential knowledge.
Today, we are wrestling with a figure so immense, so wonderfully contradictory, that pinning him down is, well, it's a semiotic challenge in itself.
We are diving into the complex, labyrinthine world of Umberto Eco.
Indeed, and Umberto Eco, who lived from 1932 to 2016, was so much more than the global best-selling novelist we know from The Name of the Rose.
Oh, absolutely.
He was, first and foremost, an Italian medievalist, a philosopher, a cultural critic, and really a foundational figure in the modern study of semiotics.
The science of signs and symbols.
Exactly. A true modern Renaissance man working across the entire spectrum of the humanities in the 20th and 21st centuries.
So our mission today, for you, the listener, is to unpack that glorious duality of his career. How did this hyper-complex academic...
A man who spent his early years on the scholastic rigor of medieval philosophy.
Right, and the precise architecture of language. How did he suddenly pivot and become the undisputed master of the popular historical mystery?
And not just any mystery. He embedded his deepest theoretical concepts into fiction that sold millions and millions of copies worldwide.
We need to argue that his academic work wasn't just related to his fiction.
It was the essential fuel for it. His novels weren't a side project or a distraction from his philosophy.
They were the ultimate application of it.
The most complete application, yes. We're going to trace that timeline and show you exactly how his theories about interpretation led him straight to writing the greatest literary puzzle boxes of the late 20th century.
And just to start this whole journey on a perfectly strange, perfectly fitting note, we have to talk about his name.
Ah, yes. The name itself.
Eco actually believed his family name was an acronym. It was supposedly given to his grandfather, who was a foundling, by a city official.
The acronym was Ex Caelus Oblatus,
which is Latin for a gift from the heavens.
I mean, you can't make it up. The ultimate sign, already embedded in his identity.
It's a mystery, a hidden meaning, and an obscure history, all wrapped up in one simple word.
A gift from the heavens, indeed. Let's jump into the foundations that built this man of signs.
From the medieval world of Aquinas to the realities of fascist Italy.
To understand the later, fiercely anti-authoritarian cultural critic, you have to start in Alessandria, Piedmont, where Eco was born in 1932.
And his childhood was just immediately and completely shaped by the pervasive influence of Italian fascism under Mussolini.
The regime wasn't just political. It controlled education, culture, the entire ideological fabric of daily life.
Which brings us to a really crucial, maybe even unsettling, biographical detail, one that gives his later political writings so much weight.
At the age of 10, Eco participated in the Ludi Juveniles,
which were these standardized nationwide youth competitions.
Designed to test loyalty and ideological alignment. It was pure state programming.
And this wasn't some minor local contest. These were highly formalized state-run events meant to instill compliance and nationalist fervor. The writing prompt was just starkly ideological.
That's right, and Eco received the first provincial award for his response.
Positive response.
A positive response to a deeply loaded fascist prompt. Should we die for the glory of Mussolini and the immortal destiny of Italy?
A 10-year-old child being rewarded by the state for articulating propaganda.
It's a stark detail. It shows you just how total the influence of the regime was on the educational system at the time. The programming was absolute.
And that compliance, even if it was just youthful and necessary for survival, it stands in such sharp contrast to his later profound critique of fascist ideology.
The work that would become Fascism.
Exactly.
The contrast is the key. His later work becomes this philosophical examination of the very ideological mechanisms he experienced as a boy. He understood firsthand how science and language could be hijacked by a totalitarian system.
But the war, thankfully, provided a kind of counter-education.
It did. During World War II, he and his mother moved to a small village in the Piedmontese mountainside to escape the bombing.
And it was there, after the liberation in 1945, that the official signs of fascism gave way to new, subversive cultural signs.
He was exposed to American comic books for the first time.
A huge source of mass culture.
And also the scattered elements of the European resistance movements and profoundly the stark reality of the Holocaust that emerged after the regime fell.
So you have these elements: mass culture, resistance to a totalizing ideology, and the recognition of manufactured evil.
And those would all become absolutely central themes in his life's work.
His father, Giulio, an accountant and a veteran of 3 wars, he pushed him toward a more stable career. Law, I believe.
He did. which, thankfully for literary and philosophical history, Eco promptly rejected.
He went to the University of Turin, United, instead to pursue philosophy. And this is where we see the first foundation of his intellectual duality.
His laurea degree thesis, completed in 1954. It was centered entirely on the aesthetics of the medieval philosopher and theologian Thomas Aquinas.
That choice is so important. Aquinas is the ultimate systematizer.
He is. He sought to define things like beauty, truth, and goodness within a single, coherent, divinely ordered hierarchical system.
So Eco's early work, which became his first book in 1956, The Aesthetics of Thomas Aquinas, was just steeped in this scholastic rigor, exploring art and beauty within that rigid medieval framework.
He started his career, in other words, by studying the most closed of systems, a fixed, divinely ordained structure of thought. He was learning how to build and maintain an intellectual order.
Exactly. Then, after graduation, he started balancing that high culture with a new awareness of mass media. He got a job.
He worked for the state broadcasting station Radio Televisione Italiana, or RAI, in Milan.
Producing cultural programming.
But he was being exposed daily to the raw data of modern mass communication, the stuff of the real world.
He also published a small collection of satirical cartoons and verse around this time.
Yes, Philosophi in Libertà, or Philosophers at Liberty, under the pseudonym Daedalus. You can already see that flair for playful intellectual critique.
And of course, there was real-world duty. He did 18 months of compulsory military service in the Italian army.
Right. In 1958, when he got back, he solidified his academic path. He published a second major scholarly monograph in 1959, The Development of Medieval Aesthetics.
Which built on his Aquinas work.
It did, and this tremendous academic rigor earned him his Libera Docenza in Aesthetics in 1961.
So by the early 1960s, Eco is undeniably a serious, credentialed medieval aesthetician. A very specific, very highbrow academic.
But all that popular culture he was exposed to at RAI must have been just screaming for intellectual attention.
It's time to see how he takes that medieval structural understanding and basically weaponizes it to analyze the modern world.
The physical and intellectual shift from the cloistered, fixed world of medieval manuscript to contemporary television studios, well, that marks the crucial beginning of Eco's life as a major public intellectual.
He starts pioneering this rigorous philosophical analysis of popular culture.
Analyzing it not as just some ephemeral distraction, but as a system of signs that needs to be decoded.
Okay, let's unpack that. The key turning point in his public profile came in 1961 with a short essay,
Phenomenology of Mike Bongiorno.
This was a critical and, frankly, a pretty daring analysis of Mike Bongiorno,
who was the most popular and often seen as kind of artistically unrefined quiz show host in Italy at the time.
And the essay appeared in a sophisticated magazine run by the tire manufacturer Pirelli.
Which shows you how he was already crossing boundaries, using a popular platform to deliver high-level critical thought.
Bongiorno was the embodiment of the common man achieving massive success, but without needing, specialized knowledge or exceptional talent.
And that's what Eco keyed in on. What was his fundamental insight into this media figure?
It was brilliant, and it's highly predictive of the dynamics we see in celebrity culture today. Eco observed that Bongiorno does not provoke inferiority complexes, even though he's presenting himself as an idol of success.
What's fascinating there is that Eco saw Bongiorno as a mirror, not a standard to aspire to.
Precisely. The observation was that the audience didn't strive to reach Bongiorno's level. They loved him because they felt, fundamentally, that everyone is already at his level.
So he represented a kind of manufactured mediocrity that was universally accessible and comforting.
Exactly. This commentary on mass media authenticity brought Eco widespread notoriety among the general public. It proved he could write essays that had both intellectual bite and popular appeal.
And that critique of manufactured mediocrity is so essential. It sets the stage for his most critical academic work.
Because he saw Bongiorno's audience as passive consumers, they were accepting the sign, the host, at face value.
Which is the polar opposite of the kind of active, challenging audience he was about to champion in his literary theory.
Which leads us directly into what is arguably his most important academic contribution to literary theory, the concept of the open text.
Published in 1962 as Opera Aperta, or The Open Work, this was a fundamental intellectual revolution against traditional literary criticism.
So, before Eco, how did traditional criticism, what we might call the closed text approach, view a work of art?
It viewed a work as a fixed string of meaning. The author intends a single unequivocal interpretation, the message. And the reader's job is just to extract that fixed meaning.
Like a piece of propaganda, or even the dogmatic structure of medieval aesthetics he studied in Aquinas.
Exactly. It's a one-way street. Eco flipped that script entirely. His argument was that the greatest and most alive literary texts are instead fields of meaning.
Fields of meaning.
Yes. They are dynamic, internally alive systems that demand a profound psychological and intellectual engagement from you, the reader. A closed text limits understanding. It's predictable.
But the works that are most active, the open texts.
Those are the ones that demand choice, that present ambiguities, that invite the reader to participate in the act of creation itself.
This can sound a bit abstract. Can you give us an example of what an open text looks like in practice? What kinds of works was he looking at?
Certainly. He was drawing heavily on early 20th century movements. Think of James Joyce's Finnegan's Wake.
Right, where the structure is fragmented, the language is a mix of everything and constantly shifting.
Yeah. And you, the reader, have to choose from multiple possible meanings with every single paragraph. Or think of aleatoric or chance-based music from the 1950s, where the order of notes or even whole sections is left up to the performer.
So the work isn't complete until the reader or the performer makes a decision.
Exactly. The reader isn't a passive recipient absorbing a message like Buongiorno's audience. The reader is an active co-creator, required to continually interpret and choose among multiple potential meanings.
And this wasn't just a passing idea for him. It laid the entire theoretical groundwork for his later concept of the reader's responsibility.
Culminating in his compilation, The Role of the Reader, published in 1979. It was there that he really cemented the idea that interpretation is an active, demanding, and structured process.
And this active engagement led him formally into the study of signs into semiotics. His specific methodology is known as interpretative semiotics.
Right. And that distinction is important. It implies a different focus from other semiotic models.
Oh, how does it differ?
Well, traditional semiotics often focus just on defining the structure of the sign itself, like Saussure's binary model of the signifier and the signified.
The word and the concept it represents.
Right. Eco, who drew heavily from the American philosopher Charles Sanders Peirce, focused instead on the process of interpretation, what Peirce called unlimited semiosis.
Unlimited semiosis. That sounds terrifyingly close to the chaos of the internet he later criticized.
And that's the tension. It's critical. Unlimited semiosis means that one sign leads to another sign, which leads to another, in a potentially infinite chain of interpretation.
So meaning could just dissolve into chaos.
It could. And Eco realized that to prevent that, you needed rules. His interpretative semiotics sought to define the limits and constraints on that interpretation. If you're interpreting a text, you can't just make up anything you want.
There's still a closed aspect, the text itself, which dictates acceptable readings, even within that open field of possibilities.
Exactly. He was defining the difference between legitimate, constrained interpretation and just arbitrary, self-indulgent fabrication.
And he developed this complex framework in key academic texts.
Yes, like La Struttura Assente, the absent structure, in 1968, and his comprehensive magnum opus, A Theory of Semiotics, in 1975. This cemented him as a global authority, not just in aesthetics, but in the entire structure of human communication.
But he wasn't just defining academic theories, he was actively applying them to contemporary culture, which brings us to one of his most colorful and politically active concepts from the late 1960s.
Semiological guerrilla warfare.
A professor of visual communications in Florence, using military metaphors to describe critical theory. It sounds exactly like Eco.
He coined the term, sometimes also called communications guerrilla warfare, while he was a professor at the University of Florence between 1965 and 1969.
And the context was the rise of powerful centralized mass media, like television.
Which Eco feared was creating a closed, manipulative system of signs for passive consumption.
So what did he mean by telling citizens to engage in a semiological guerrilla?
It was a concept that really influenced early theories of cultural resistance. The idea was that since mass media communicates the dominant ideology through signs advertising, news framing, political rhetoric, the only way to resist total control is to intercept and subvert those signs on the ground.
So instead of trying to shut down the source, the big media corporation,
You attack the signs as they are being consumed by the public. You conduct a guerrilla attack on the message itself.
so if an advertisement uses a sign to signify consumer desire,
The semiological guerrilla interrupts that sign, recodes it, and makes it signify resistance or political critique. This is the intellectual root of what we now call culture jamming.
Was this purely theoretical, or did he think this was an effective tactic for citizens fighting power structures?
Eco was a realist. He wasn't advocating physical revolution, but intellectual and cultural resistance. He saw it as a necessary defense mechanism to keep the mind open when the media was trying to impose a closed interpretation of reality.
It's the ultimate application of the active reader concept. You have to be an active reader of the entire world around you.
The essay was hugely influential, especially in Europe, and it was collected in his book, Faith in Fakes. It really marks his definitive move from just analyzing how communication works to actively prescribing how you can use that knowledge to resist being consumed by media ideology.
After this intense period of theoretical output, he finally settled at the University of Bologna in 1971, where he became a professor of semiotics, a position he held for most of the rest of his career.
And now we arrive at the spectacular and frankly lucrative confluence of Eco's two identities. For decades, he had been doing this deep scholarly work in medievalism and semiotics.
Defining how signs work, how texts are interpreted, how libraries are structured.
And then in 1980, he finally sat down and wrote a novel.
The Name of the Rose. His breakthrough into global pop culture. It was an immediate sensation.
It won Italy's most prestigious literary prize, the Strega Prize, in 1981, and then just became a massive global bestseller.
And the setting alone is just pure distilled eco.
A historical murder mystery set in a meticulously rendered 14th century Italian monastery.
The plot centers on this Franciscan friar, William of Baskerville, and his assistant, the Benedictine novice Adso. They're investigating a series of mysterious murders in the week leading up to a major religious debate.
A debate about poverty and the spiritual future of the church.
So why did this novel resonate so deeply? I mean, it's dense, it has long passages of untranslated Latin, it's obsessed with arcane theology. Why did this complex academic exercise succeed as popular fiction?
Because Eco masterfully married his two worlds in a way no one expected. His background as a medievalist provided the rich historical texture, the scholastic arguments, the atmosphere.
But his expertise in semiotics provided the plot engine.
Exactly. The entire structure of the murder mystery is fundamentally a detective story about interpretation. It's about reading physical signs, analyzing cryptic texts, and discerning the intent behind ambiguous symbols.
So William of Baskerville is a semiotician with a magnifying glass.
Precisely. The murders aren't solved through brute force or typical police work. They're solved through deduction, through interpreting the signs, the arrangement of bodies, the patterns of behavior, the texts that are being read or hidden.
And the medieval monastery, with its specialized texts and secret library, is the perfect metaphor for a highly constrained but ultimately solvable semiotic system.
This is the so what connection for you, the listener. The medieval manuscripts and the library's secrets weren't just window dressing. They were a massive, complex system of signs that needed deciphering, just like any open text in the modern world. The murderer's motive hinges on controlling the flow of information.
Specifically controlling the text that can be read.
And this is where the intertextual depth really shines. Eco built a labyrinth of illusions that rewards the reader who's willing to play the game of interpretation. He uses his fiction to show that no book exists in isolation.
Let's start with the protagonist himself. William of Baskerville. His name is a powerful, double-coded sign.
It is. First, it honors the English philosopher William of Ockham, a key figure in late medieval thought known for Occam's razor.
The principle of parsimony.
Right. And second, it immediately evokes the fictional detective Sherlock Holmes through the title of the famous mystery, The Hound of the Baskervilles.
And Eco makes that connection unavoidable.
He does. Several passages describing William's physical appearance, his height, his aloofness, his powers of observation, they are intentionally strongly reminiscent of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's descriptions of Holmes.
That's a conscious use of signs to signal to the reader what kind of cognitive framework they need to adopt to follow the investigation.
And then you have the villainous, blind monk Jorge of Burgos, who guards the dangerous secrets of the hidden library.
This is a profound and moving tribute to Jorge Luis Borges.
One of the two modern authors Eco explicitly cited as his greatest influence, the other being James Joyce.
And the connections are just layered. Borges, like the character Jorge, dedicated his life entirely to books.
Lived a celibate life and famously went blind in his later years, making him the ultimate custodian of unseen knowledge.
And of course, the secretive, labyrinthine library itself, the setting of so much of the mystery and danger.
That's a self-contained literary tribute, alluding to Borges' seminal short story, The Library of Babel, where all possible knowledge exists in a dizzying, infinite, and potentially dangerous arrangement.
And finally, the enigmatic title. The name of the rose is famously unexplained within the body of the novel.
And it closes with that dense, reflective Latin verse.
Stat rosa pristina nomine, nomina nuda tenimus.
The ancient rose remains only in name. We hold only the bare names. The rose, a powerful symbol that has meant everything from beauty and secrecy to mysticism throughout history, serves as an example of the fate of all remarkable things.
So if the object is gone, only the sign, the word, the name remains.
That is the semiotician's ultimate statement embedded in the fiction. The physical world decays, the divine order collapses, but the process of naming and interpreting is what endures. The novel becomes a meditation on how we use language to anchor meaning in a world of flux.
So if The Name of the Rose was about decoding the fixed past, his next major novel, Foucault's Pendulum, from 1988, was about the terrifying malleability of the present through signs.
Specifically, the signs of conspiracy.
Absolutely. Foucault's Pendulum takes the reader far away from the rigid confines of the 14th century and plunges them into modern, cynical Milan.
The premise starts simply enough. 3 underemployed editors at a minor publishing house, bored with reviewing junk manuscripts about the occult, decide to invent the plan.
And the plan is what, exactly?
It's a vast, incredibly complex, and totally fictitious conspiracy theory. It proposes that the Knights Templar secretly survived their demise and are currently planning a world takeover using a global network of cryptic messages and historical signs.
They're essentially applying their sophisticated knowledge of semiotics, history, and narrative structure to create the ultimate open text.
A map of connections where the reader can link anything to anything else.
That's the genius of the book. The editors are playing an intellectual game, creating signifiers without any underlying genuine signified. They're testing the boundaries of interpretation.
And the danger arises when the fictional game becomes terrifyingly real.
How does that happen?
Outsiders who are already obsessed with hidden histories and finding secret signs everywhere, they learn of the plan. And they believe that the editors have genuinely, accidentally discovered the secret to regaining the lost Templar treasure.
So this brilliantly illustrates the danger of unconstrained interpretation.
A primary concern for Eco the semiotician. If you look hard enough for patterns, if you truly believe everything is a sign, you will find them, whether they are real or not. The human mind, Eco suggests, is a conspiracy-generating engine,
which connects the academic theory perfectly to the fictional narrative. The open text requires constraint, and Foucault's Pendulum shows what happens when those constraints are removed.
And Eco continued exploring these dualities in his later novels, always making sure they were rich in history, language, and complexity. It was an intellectual game he continued to play with the reader.
Let's touch on a few of those later novels because they each tackle different aspects of this semiotic and historical uncertainty. The Island of the Day Before from 1994 is often described as one of his most contemplative novels.
And least action-packed, that's a fair assessment. It's set in the 17th century and features a man, Roberto, stranded on a ship near an island he believes is on the opposite side of the international beat line.
And the main tension isn't about physical escape.
No, it's about these complex internal and philosophical dilemmas. Roberto is paralyzed by his inability to swim, and the book largely consists of lengthy internal reflections on his life, his identity, and the adventures that led him there.
So it's an exploration of how time, space, and personal history are constantly being reinterpreted by the self.
Precisely. Then you have Bottolino in 2000, which leans heavily into the idea of the unreliable narrator and historical fabrication.
The title character, Bottolino, is a polyglot scholar who boasts openly about his ability to lie and tell tall tales.
He recounts his history from being a peasant lad to the adopted son of Emperor Frederick Barbarossa and his mission to find Prester John's mythical realm. The entire narrative forces the historian he's confessing to, and you, the reader, to remain continually unsure of how much of his story is accurate history and how much is just pure invention.
It's a grand examination of the impossibility of objective historical truth and how narrative itself structures our reality.
And finally, a novel that dealt directly with manufacturing societal hatred, The Prague Cemetery from 2010.
This one is significantly darker.
Oh, yes. It tells the story of a cynical secret agent and forger who weaves these intrigues across 19th century Europe. It explicitly traces the mechanics behind the rise of modern anti-Semitism.
By referencing pivotal historical events, like the Dreyfus Affair.
And critically, the fraudulent document known as the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. It's a chilling fictional demonstration of how toxic signs and fabricated plots can be consciously engineered to poison society.
The real-world application of the cautionary tale he wrote in Foucault's Pendulum.
Exactly.
It's clear that Eco saw his academic, literary, and public work as inseparable. He wasn't just writing and teaching, he was an institutional builder, dedicated to expanding scholarly inquiry in Italy.
Very much so. He founded the Department of Media Studies at the University of the Republic of San Marino in 1988. Then, at the University of Bologna, where he spent most of his career, he founded the Institute of Communication Disciplines and later the Higher School for the Study of the Humanities.
He was actively structurally shaping the future of these academic fields, making sure they were equipped to handle the complexities of the modern media landscape.
And crucially, he recognized the limitations of a purely Western European perspective in academic study.
So in 1988 at Bologna, he created this unique international program called the Anthropology of the West.
That title alone is highly provocative. It suggests a decentering of the traditional academic focus. The goal was to view Western culture through the lens of non-Western scholars, specifically African and Chinese academics, using their own cultural and semiotic criteria.
So he was actively using external cultural perspectives as a tool for critical self-reflection. He wanted to see the Western system of signs from the outside to expose its inherent assumptions.
This transcultural network led to major international seminars and the publication of the book The Unicorn and the Dragon, which discussed how knowledge is created in China and Europe, with scholars from both sides contributing equally.
It shows his desire to find a truly universal, common semiotic ground.
And even when discussing his most abstract academic topics, Eco was remarkably grounded about their complexity. When he published Kant and the Platypus in 1997, a major theoretical work, he reportedly issued a clear public warning to his massive fan base.
This is maybe his most famous piece of academic self-deprecation.
It is. It highlights that duality again. He advised his popular readers, "This is a hardcore book. Don't buy it if you are not Einstein."
He wanted to ensure people didn't mistakenly expect a fun, medieval romp or a Templar conspiracy. He was demanding that his academic work be approached with the intellectual rigor it deserved.
But when we talk about his role as a cultural conscience, one essay stands out for its renewed, chilling relevance in the 21st century, Our Fascism.
Also known as Eternal Fascism from 1995.
The renewed relevance of this essay is profound. Eco, reflecting on his childhood experience receiving that award under Mussolini, realized that fascism wasn't a single monolithic ideology defined by a flag or a leader.
He saw it as a constellation of cultural behaviors and psychological mechanisms.
Yes, and he listed 14 general properties that he believed defined fascist ideologies regardless of time or place.
And these weren't political platforms. They were characteristics of a mindset. What are some of the most memorable of those 14 points?
Well, they include concepts like the cult of tradition, the rejection of modernism, the fear of difference or the different, and an obsession with conspiracy and external threats.
And crucially, he noted that the movement has to define its audience, not through objective criteria,
but through a constant emphasis on frustration, the idea that the movement is the only salvation from a confusing, unjust world.
That structure of constantly identifying an enemy and harnessing grievance. It sounds less like a specific historical party and more like a universal formula for authoritarian movements.
It is precisely a formula. Eco made it clear that you don't need all 14 points to be present, but if even a few are operating, you need to be deeply concerned. It provided a clear, actionable checklist for identifying creeping authoritarianism.
A vital tool for critical thinking in any era.
And this brings us to the ultimate friction point in Eco's public thought. His scathing critique of the digital age, which he was diagnosing using the very semiotic tools he himself developed.
He maintained a long-running, influential cultural commentary in his twice-monthly newspaper column, La Bustina di Minerva, or Minerva's Matchbook,
which ran from 1985 until shortly before his death in 2016. It gave him a consistent platform to apply his critical eye to current events.
And it was through that platform or similar interviews late in his career that he delivered his most memorable and perhaps most controversial critique of the digital landscape in 2015.
Focusing squarely on social media.
His words were direct and have become this notorious summary of information overload and the death of expertise.
He said social media gives legions of idiots the right to speak when they once only spoke at a bar after a glass of wine without harming the community. But now they have the same right to speak as a Nobel Prize winner. It's the invasion of the idiots.
That quote is hard to hear without wincing, but it perfectly encapsulates his fear of uncontrolled interpretation combined with unchecked access.
It seems to directly clash with his earlier championing of the open text. Why did he draw such a stark boundary here?
He saw a critical difference, I think, between the structural ambiguity of an open work of art, like a Joyce novel, and the undifferentiated noise of the internet.
Exactly. An open literary text still operates within a defined system of language, history, and narrative convention. It still requires the reader to be competent.
Whereas the internet.
The internet, and particularly social media, he felt, destroyed the necessary hierarchy of competence and verification. It leveled the playing field of public discourse by giving instantaneous authority to baseless opinion.
He spent his life arguing that texts are open to interpretation, but he drew a clear boundary when that openness became a cacophony of uneducated, unsubstantiated opinion that actively drowned out expertise and the historical record.
It was the ultimate failure of constrained interpretation.
Umberto Eco's legacy is fundamentally built on his ability to synthesize. He didn't just read books. He used them as foundational building blocks for new, complex narratives.
Narratives that engaged in this deep intertextual conversation. As we mentioned, he cited Joyce and Borges as his two biggest modern influences.
Which emphasizes his dedication to intertextuality, the idea that every literary work exists in relation to all others, constantly referencing, commenting on, and enriching the global library of stories.
But his successful fusion of dense philosophy with mass-market fiction led to a predictable and often divided critical reception. He often stunned critics with the sheer simultaneous complexity and popularity of his fiction.
The split was quite distinct. On one side, you had the skeptics, the purists in philosophy and literary history who found his academic style, well, sometimes overly ornate or self-referential.
One famous critique came from the philosopher Roger Scruton.
He attacked Eco's esoteric tendencies, suggesting he sought the rhetoric of technicality, generating so much smoke for so long that the reader will begin to blame his own lack of perception.
In other words, he was accused of obscuring simple ideas with complex jargon.
The art historian Nicholas Penny also accused him of pandering to the academic cause of relevance when his earlier essays on mass culture appeared,
suggesting a commercial or trend-following motive behind some of his theoretical pivots. So he was sometimes seen as brilliant, but perhaps unnecessarily dense or even self-indulgent.
On the other side, though, his supporters lauded his levity, his encyclopedic scope, and his ability to make abstruse subjects accessible to millions.
Frank Kermode, reviewing The Name of the Rose, called it a wonderfully interesting book precisely because of its odd parentage of medievalism and modern semiotics. He was proving that seriousness didn't have to be dry.
And his influence was undeniable in post-structuralist circles. Philosophers like Gilles Deleuze and Jacques Derrida both took inspiration from his early theoretical work, the open work.
They used it to explore the fluid nature of language and meaning. Carlin Romano ultimately described Eco as having become, over time, the critical conscience at the center of Italian humanistic culture,
uniting smaller worlds like no one before him.
And this unifying work earned him immense recognition globally. The Strega Prize, the McLuhan Teleglobe Prize, and countless honorary doctorates from institutions like Yale, Oxford, and Rutgers.
His lifelong dedication to knowledge, scholarship, and the physical bound book was perhaps best symbolized by his personal life.
He maintained not just one, but two immense private libraries.
Which is just a staggering feat of acquisition and organization.
We're talking about 30,000 volumes in his Milan apartment, focused on the modern era and his current work.
And another 20,000 volumes in his vacation home near Urbino, focused on his specialty, the early modern and medieval periods.
That's 50,000 volumes in total.
50,000 physical books, meticulously cataloged and used. It's hard to imagine a more fitting monument to a man who dedicated his entire life to defining and interpreting the meaning held within pages.
This monumental personal collection was, in fact, the subject of the 2023 documentary film Umberto Eco, A Library of the World.
Umberto Eco died in Milan in 2016 at the age of 84, after a 2-year struggle with pancreatic cancer. He left behind a profound intellectual and literary legacy as a professor emeritus at the University of Bologna.
His life's work stands as a continuous interrogation of the power and the limits of signs.
So if we summarize Eco's identity for you, the listener, he was the ultimate synthesist. a medievalist who used scholasticism to understand and invent detective plots,
A philosopher of language who built global conspiracies to demonstrate the dangers of unconstrained interpretation.
and a cultural critic who wielded semiotics to diagnose the flaws of mass media and eventually the digital age.
He showed us that the complex academic world of signs and the popular world of stories are not separate. They are two sides of the same manuscript page.
And reading either one requires intellectual rigor, historical context, and an understanding of the rules of the game.
Which brings us to our final provocative thought for you to carry forward, and it sits right at the heart of Eco's glorious contradiction.
We've emphasized that he warned fiercely against the invasion of the idiots via social media, the chaos of unlimited, unconstrained interpretation of signs in the digital sphere. He saw the internet as an endless, dangerous sea of noise.
And yet, his fundamental theoretical contribution, the open work, explicitly championed works that invited the reader's widest possible interpretation, demanding participation and ambiguity.
He dedicated his life to creating works, from the labyrinthine library of the monastery to the fictional conspiracy of the Templars, that actively invited you, the reader, to engage, decode, and interpret relentlessly.
So here is the paradox we leave you with. Did Eco's passionate love for the bound book and its contained, finite collection of signs ultimately lose the fight against the chaos of the open internet, the endless, uncontrolled library of the world?
Or did his own theories about communication mean that ultimately all texts, even a viral tweet, a YouTube video, or a baseless conspiracy posted online, must be considered an open, interpretable field of meaning?
And thus require the intellectual defenses of the semiotic gorilla, for better or for worse. Something for you to mull over as you navigate your next encounter with an open text, digital or physical, and decide where the line between productive interpretation and dangerous noise truly lies.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into Umberto Eco.